Good morning. Today is Monday, March 31st, 2025. So we begin the third book of the Torah, the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, and this week's Torah portion is the Parsha of Vayikra. And this week's Torah portion deals mostly with the various sacrifice offerings that were offered by people on different occasions. And a significant part of this week's portion, a significant part of the overall structure of the karbanos, of the sacrifices, deals with the various sin offerings that different individuals or groups would have to bring depending on their status and depending on the circumstances of what they did. And so, for example, the Torah tells us about nefesh ki secheta, a soul, meaning a person who sins. And of course, we're talking about a sin that is inadvertent. In general, the karban is not the approach to take for a person who has committed a willful sin, but it is the approach to take if a person is negligent and has made a mistake. So we talk about individuals, then we talk about if the Kohen commits a sin. So that's a little bit different because the Kohen is acting on behalf of the Jewish people, and that is treated somewhat differently. And then we have a sin when the entire Jewish people commits a sin inadvertently because there was an incorrect ruling by the Sanhedrin Agadol, the great Sanhedrin. So if the great court, which at that time, when the Beit HaMikdash was standing, was the final arbiter of Jewish law, if they issued a ruling and it was wrong, so then everyone who followed that ruling did something wrong, whatever it was. Of course, it wasn't their fault, because they were doing what they were supposed to do to follow the decision of the Sanhedrin, but there is a specific sin offering to recognize that they had done something wrong, even though it was not their fault. And then finally, we have the case of a nasi. Now, a nasi means a prince, also refers to a Jewish king who sins. And here's what's interesting. When introducing these various sacrifices under these various circumstances, so the Torah says, I read to you before, I'm sorry, nefesh ki secheta, a person if they sin. We don't know that a person is going to sin. We don't know that the Kohen is going to sin. We don't know the entire Jewish people is going to sin because of a mistake made by the Sanhedrin. But if it should happen, this is what to do. The language is different when it comes to the nasi. Concerning the nasi, the Torah says, asher nasi yecheteh, asher, which means when the king will sin, va'asa achas mikol mitzvos asher Hashem asher lo sa'asena bishgaga v'Hashem, when he will do something among all the mitzvos of Hashem that he is not supposed to do, but he did it and he sinned inadvertently, then this is the karban, the sacrifice that he has to bring. But our sages point out, what do you mean? Asher means when. Ki means if. I understand ki, if. We don't know that a person is going to sin. If they sin, this is what they do. But for the nasi, the king, it says asher, when he sins. Seems to indicate that it is inevitable that the nasi will sin. Why is that? Seforno, one of the classic commentators to the Torah, says something It's may sound a bit cynical, but if we reflect, I think we need to recognize the truth in it. And that is, it is expected that the king will sin. The famous quote of a former British foreign minister, Lord Acton, who said, "Power corrupts. Asher nasi yachete." You can count on the fact that a king or any leader, it could be a president, a prime minister, it could be a rabbi, it could be any kind of leader, will commit a sin because of their power, because of their position. Leaders make mistakes, inevitably. And we as a people need to recognize that. We need to be realistic. We need to understand that. Power corrupts. And even the most righteous person, usually at some point, will use their power or use their position and make, maybe inadvertently, not thinking they're doing something wrong, but will make the wrong choice. It's quite cynical, but I think we have to realize it's also very true. But Rashi says something very different. Rashi says, quoting our rabbis in the Medrash, the word asher nasi yechete, when the king will sin. The word asher, which means when, is similar, connected to the word ashrei. Asher, ashrei. The only difference is ashrei has a yud at the end. Now it's a completely different word. Ashrei means praiseworthy. What does that mean? How could praiseworthy be involved, or praiseworthy or happy? How could happiness be involved when the king sins? Listen to the words of our rabbis in the Medrash. Ashrei hador shehanasi shalo nosein leiv lahavi kapara al shkigaso. Happy is the generation. It doesn't refer to the happiness of the nasi, of the king. Nebuch, he made a mistake inadvertently, but he did something wrong inadvertently. So he's not happy, but the generation is happy. The community that follows this leader should be happy. Why? Shehanasi shalom nosein leiv lahavi kapara al shkigaso. That their leader publicly took responsibility for the mistake that they made. They admitted to it, and they took the steps to correct it. They didn't try to hide it. They didn't try to deny it. And when that happens, the people that are being led by this leader, they should be happy. They should be grateful. Kal v'chomer, and certainly even more so, shemis charetet al zadonosav, when this leader does something on purpose wrong and regrets it and apologizes for it and takes action to try to correct what he did wrong. Ashrei hador she'anasi shalo nosein leiv. And remember, bringing a carbon is voluntary. Nobody can tell you to bring a carbon. That's why it says nosein leiv, that the leader, the king, had it in his heart to take responsibility. He could have hidden it maybe. But he takes responsibility. And you know, it takes a lot of courage. A person who's a leader, in any capacity, to go to the Beis Hamikdash, to go to the Kohen, and to say publicly that I sinned by accident, but I still made a mistake. It's not easy to do. There's embarrassment. There could be political ramifications depending on the situation. It could even be a certain chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name, that this leader did such a thing, but they admit it. And if the king or the leader can rise above all the pressures to hide mistakes and to not admit to them and to not acknowledge them, then the king may not be happy, the leader may not be happy. It's not comfortable to do that. But the people will be very happy to have such a ruler. I think today we see how important this is. I hate to say it, by its absence. So often, and I'm not going to make political comments here, you'll just have to take it how you want to take it. But so often in the world today, those people who are leaders in every single capacity, so often are not willing to admit they made a mistake, are not willing to take responsibility for the errors they have, are not willing to try to fix the mistakes, but rather to deny them and to insist that what they did was right and nothing was wrong. And I think we see, again, in every level of leadership, I think we see the negative consequences that come from that. And I think that in certain circumstances, those negative consequences can be very, very dangerous. And I think a society is very worried and very not happy when its leader refuses to take responsibility, to acknowledge a mistake was made. I think it's very dangerous. And I think we see the truth of this. So I want to share with you a story that expresses what Jewish leadership, again, in every area and level, ought to be. There's a story about a great rabbi who lived in Bnei Brak, which is a suburb of Tel Aviv in Israel, and his name was Rabbi Yaakov Kanievsky. He was a great, great scholar. He's known as the Stipler Rav. The Stipler Rav. Now, especially in Bnei Brak, which is a very religious area, the Stipler Rav was probably one of the greatest rabbis, most respected rabbis living in this area at that time. And of course, everybody who had a bar mitzvah for their son wanted the Stipler Rav to come to the bar mitzvah on Shabbos. What an honor it would be to have such a great rabbi coming to their son's bar mitzvah. And so, of course, the Stipler Rav was invited to virtually every single bar mitzvah, and he could have spent every Shabbos, his whole Shabbos, going from bar mitzvah to bar mitzvah. He could just, that alone would have taken all of his time. Okay? All right. So he went as much as he could, because even he realized how much people appreciated it. But especially as he got older and he was weak, he was not able to do this as often. And it was difficult for him to attend a bar mitzvah, especially when he wasn't personally involved, just because of the honor that would come to the family because he'd be there. And so it became less and less, until finally he had to tell people that he was sorry that he could not attend bar mitzvahs. He just wasn't healthy enough. However, one Shabbos, the Stipler made an exception. And he attended one bar mitzvah on a Shabbos morning. It was the day of the bar mitzvah, the day the boy turned 13. And it was Shabbos morning. And the Stipler went to this bar mitzvah, which was at that time in his life very unusual. Now, after the davening, the Stipler, the greatest rabbi in the area, went over to this little boy who had just become bar mitzvah. And he said to the boy, Mazel Tov. And then he leaned over to the boy and he whispered in his ear, Nobody could hear what he said. And the boy answered him and said, "No, it's all right." No one understood what was going on. Why did the discipler go to this bar mitzvah? There was no obvious connection with this boy. What did the discipler say to him? Why did this 13-year-old boy say to the greatest rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Kanievsky, the discipler of, "No, it's okay"? What was going on? So here's the story. 6 years earlier, keep this in mind, the timing. 6 years earlier, when the boy was 7 years old, it happened that this boy was once in shul in the same place where the stipler was. This is 6 years earlier. So he's a 7-year-old boy. And this boy was davening. Okay, he's 7 years old, but he was praying, he was davening. He has siddur. And it happened that his siddur was very, very large. You may never have seen this. Well, like the siddur for the person who's leading the davening is very large, but I have seen, not recently, but in previous years, like a siddur or a machzor that's very, very tall. Okay, and this boy was using such a siddur, and he was praying from this siddur. The stipler saw this boy, and he thought that the boy was not praying, but he was studying from a Gemara, because the book looked like the size and the shape of a volume of Talmud. And the stipler thought that he was studying a passage of the Talmud during the davening. Now, I've got to tell you, halavai that every 7-year-old boy would be studying a passage of the Talmud during the davening. Halavai. All right. But the stipler thought that that was not right. Of course, it's not right, because there's a time for learning Torah and there's a time for prayer. And during prayer, you don't learn Torah. So the stipler went over to this boy and he said to him, "My dear boy, now is the time for praying. It's not the time for Talmud study." And the boy said to him, "I am praying. This is a siddur. It's a prayer book. It's not a volume of the Talmud. It's not a Gemara." The stipler said to him, "Please forgive me. I'm sorry. I apologize." And that was the end of the story. But it was not the end of the story, because the stipler Rav made a note to himself in his mind, and 6 years later, he came to this boy's bar mitzvah, the day that he became bar mitzvah. And he explained to the boy that even though, because he had accused him of something, okay, it's minor, it's understandable, and whatever you want to say, but the stipler had said something critical, and the stipler was wrong. And even though the boy at the time had forgiven him, but according to Jewish law, when a person is a minor, they don't have the legal capacity to grant forgiveness. So the stipler kept it in his mind. And on the day that this boy became bar mitzvah, he went to the bar mitzvah, even though it was difficult for him. He wished mazel tov to the boy, and then he leaned over to whisper and to say, "Today I have to ask you for forgiveness. Today you're a gadol, you're an adult according to Jewish law. Is the first day that you're able to grant forgiveness according to Jewish law. I ask you to forgive me for accusing you when I was wrong and you were doing the right thing. What I said was wrong." And the boy said, No, of course, it's all right. Of course I forgive you." Now, the stipler kept this in mind for 6 years, to be able on the first day that he could legally ask for forgiveness, to go over to this boy and ask him for forgiveness. This is an illustration of this comment of our rabbis. Ashrei Hador, Praiseworthy, happy is the generation where its leaders understand the necessity to take responsibility for what they have done wrong, even when it was in error, and to ask forgiveness. I hope, maybe one day soon, that we will all merit to have leaders like that in every kind of leadership, that take responsibility, that acknowledge their mistakes, that make us, those who they lead, happy to have such a person leading us. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.